Well, thank you very much. And you can actually sit down now. You don't have to stand up anymore.
Thank you. I
Um,
appreciate that.
yeah, anytime. Um, I do want to say it's quite a pleasure to be here, but to be there wherever you guys are. And we're going to be talking about working up the pruritic dog. Let's face it, it's one of the most common things that all of us, whether we're specialists or we're generalists, we see dogs that are scratching, chewing, biting, etc. all the time. Certainly sometimes it's more in the warm weather, but we see it on a year-round basis. So there are a couple things that we always need to think about. The first one is owners will come in, they'll put a dog in front of you that's obviously scratching, and oftentimes even before you have a chance to say hello, they'll say, well, what is it? Because you're seeing the animal. It's not like a dog who's not doing well. You're seeing the animal, he's obviously scratching, what is it? And my standard answer is that there are usually one of three different things causing this. It's either allergies, flea allergy, atopic dermatitis, which we also call environmental allergies, or food allergy. So it's either an allergy or infection, pyoderma, malassezia, the yeast infection, and occasionally dermatophytes, and or ectoparasites like scabies and occasionally Demodex or Chilotella. So that's my answer is it's probably one of these three things: allergies, infections, or ectoparasites. And just because they have one of those doesn't mean that they can't have the other. It's, for example, with allergies, as we'll see, very common to have secondary infections, and infections by themselves are pruritic. And so when we're facing an animal, it's very important, if we think they have allergies, to also make sure that they do not have, or that we can control the infections that usually go hand in hand with having the allergic state. So we start off asking these four general categories questions. First, we want to know how long has the animal had the skin disease, and if there's any seasonality. The seasonality is very helpful, assuming the animal's had this condition for more than a year. If the animal only has problems in the warm weather, then usually I'm suspicious of either environmental allergies, for example, to pollens, grasses, and or a flea problem. If the animal only has this problem in the cold weather, then I'm usually concerned about molds, which seem to, especially in damp environments, seem to be more of a problem when dogs are kept inside more because the weather outside is bad. Next question is, what is the progression of the lesions? And by that I mean is what I'm seeing right now, is that the worst it's been, or has it been worse? And if it has been worse, how did it look? I find that more and more of my owners are coming in with actually pictures of how the dog originally looked or how it looked at its worst. Usually they come in with this on their cell phones. That's great. But we want to know, what is the progression of the lesions? And if I'm seeing it and it looks better than it did, why does the owner think that's the case? What medications, which leads us into the third group of questions, what medications have been used? Now, did any of them help or worsen the skin condition? Recognize that when people say, I tried antibiotics, that didn't work. I tried, oh yeah, we tried steroids, the other veterinarian gave them that didn't work. He's been on flea control, that didn't work. I've tried shampoos, antihistamines, atopica, whatever. It didn't work. What does that tell us? It tells us nothing, because we need to know how long was that medication used, and how often has it been used. So for example, people who come in and say, he's on flea control, that means nothing to me, because for some people that simply means that they have given a spot-on medication, like Frontline, for example, whenever they see fleas, which might be once every 3 or 4 months. It also doesn't tell me anything because maybe the animal is is getting a bath all the time. Remember, a lot of these animals smell bad to the owners. They smell bad because they're scratching a lot. They're stimulating the glands, the sebaceous glands in the skin, produces more wax, more sebum on the surface of the skin. Especially if there's a secondary bacterial or yeast infection or both, that will cause an unpleasant odor. So that means they'll go ahead and shampoo the animal more often in many cases, especially in the warm weather. And any kind of topical medication for fleas, for example, will just be washed off. And we'll talk more about flea control later on when in the lecture. So it becomes very important to ask the specifics. Somebody who says antibiotics didn't work. To me, I want to know, was it a staphylocidal antibiotic, for example, cephalexin, or was it something that really shouldn't have done much against staph, for example, amoxicillin? And indeed, how long was it given? Most bacterial infections in the dog skin infections require at least a month of antibiotic treatment. If the animal only received it for 5 or 6 or 7 days, I wouldn't expect it to work in many cases. Finally, we want to find out about the dog's environment. Are there other animals that are in the environment? Are they affected? If they're not affected, are they being treated with something? Occasionally you'll have a dog who's very pruritic, then they say, no, the other dog in the household isn't pruritic, but the other dog has arthritis and is on corticosteroids for its arthritis. So you would not expect it to be pruritic. We want to know if the dog's traveled out of the immediate area. It doesn't necessarily have to go to some interesting foreign place, and I know there are quarantine restrictions in the UK. It could just be going from, say, being an apartment dog in a city, and then it went out and visited a place in the country where it was allowed to roam free and perhaps get in contact with wild vectors of disease. And again, not only do we want to know if the other animals are affected, but if the owner is affected by any skin problems that may have been contracted concurrently. Then we want to look at the physical exam, of course. And where are these lesions? If I'm seeing lesions that are if the pruritus is mainly directed at the back half of the dog, tail head, the dorsal lumbar sacral area, or the groin, inguinal area, I always think about fleas. Recognize that if you're in an area that in the warm weather has fleas, when it gets cold, the fleas don't all die. The fleas come in where it's warm. So it's not unusual for in an area that has real seasons with cold and snow on the ground to sometimes see flea problems into October or November if they have not been addressed and if the house is relatively warm. When I practiced in New England, in Boston, I would see three peaks of flea problems. The first one would be usually by the end of March, beginning of April, when it just began to get warm. The second would be the end of July and August, when it was really warm and very humid. And then the last one would usually be by about the middle of October, where we would start having freezes, people would start heating their houses, and in would come the fleas. If, on the other hand, most of the pruritus is in the front half, the feet, the face, the ears, the axilla, or conjunctivitis, I usually then think of atopic dermatitis or even a food allergy. Now, there are exceptions to this, for example, when we talk about scabies. But in general, when we talk about allergies, for sure, this is how I think when I think about where are the lesions. And just some examples here. On the left, we have a typical flea allergy presentation, severe hyperpigmentation and thickening of the skin on the back half. And on the right, we also have a dog with flea allergies, but now it started at the back end and has now progressed up and down the front legs as well. When I start seeing lesions in the front half like this, even if the owners tell me this all started in the back, I am usually now thinking this animal not only has fleas, but probably has another allergy, either food allergy and or atopic dermatitis. This is the umbilicus of an